So you know how you are more comfortable doing C-cuts or pivots one way versus the other. One side feels comfortable and flows, the other side is kind of clunky and it feels like a lot of work for not a lot of movement. And it's a really common issue, and I don't think it's an issue that your big muscles aren't strong enough. It's more an issue that the deep muscles in your hip, I call them the rotator cuff muscles of your hip. That's not an actual term that you would learn in university, but I think it encapsulates what I'm talking about. Those muscles aren't strong enough, probably, but more importantly, they're not smart enough. So we're going to kind of go over some examples on the ice of, we're going to chat with Jimmy to see, you know, what he feels, and I'm going to show you exactly what we're talking about. Then we're going to head back to the lab. We're going to go over 4 exercises that you can do off the ice that's really going to improve that rotator cuff strength in your hip. So joined again today by Jimmy Pareda, who is a pro goalie playing in the U.S. And what are your feelings? So let's talk a little bit about just from a standing position. What do you feel are sort of the differences in your ability to do your C-cuts or pivots?
I think the biggest part for beginning goalies or younger goalies is just being able to realize which part of your foot is really going to bring the power. So when you're C-cutting forward, a lot of that power is going to come from the back of your foot and your heel, and then when you're C-cutting back, that last bit of power is going to come from your toes. I think a lot of goalies, when they realize that, start to use just the front of their blade or just the back, when you really do have to use that whole foot.
Yeah. So I wanted you to just demonstrate, because one of the exercises that we're going to work on in a minute is, or when we get back to the lab, is being able to pivot from your hip joint rather than having to kind of use your whole body. Can you just sort of show, like a good goalie, what that looks like? Yeah, as opposed to sort of getting a little bit pulled out of position, having to kind of generate that momentum. Yeah. Perfect. So when we look to at sort of traditional training, when people spend most of their time in the gym doing traditional exercises, even when they're trying to work their hip, you know, with the cable, abduction, adduction, the foot's always pointing straight ahead. But when you're on the ice, you need to have that strength in different angles and different positions.
Yeah, you really need to be able to push if your foot is a little bit ahead of your body from the side and a little bit behind as well.
Yeah, so we'll work on exercise in the lab that's going to help with that. The last thing I want to touch on too is if you jump into your RVH, so pivoting from this position, and you can tell just by looking at it, even if you don't know all about the anatomy, wow, this is a really different motion. What do you feel when you're pivoting from this position rather than from your skates? What feels different or hard about it?
It's definitely a lot harder to stabilize because you're in an awkward position that your body's really not accustomed to, as opposed to standing, when that's something that we do every day. And that's the biggest thing, is just being able to kind of control your body position, control your momentum, and be able to use that all in a positive way.
Yeah. So I was just pumping Kevin. Kevin Beach is a former pro goalie and is a coach with Pro Goaltending. And so I always love chatting with coaches because I get their perspective on what's important and why it's important, and that's what kind of steers me in the right direction. So you had some really interesting thoughts on those pivots. Can you enlighten us?
Yeah, I just like those drills. That way, you know, goalies can have control of their hip. You know, their big muscles. And Jimmy, if you can just face that camera there as you're doing your C-cutting, okay? If Jimmy has full control of his hips, okay, when he's doing his C-cutting, you can do a little skate towards the camera, like a couple C-cuts and back. So if Jimmy has control of his hip and he's able to stay square, okay, then he's going to be ahead of the play on his movements. If he starts to use kind of his full body and kind of churns his body as he's doing his C-cuts, okay? So say he goes out top of his crease, the play's coming in, and he starts to come back and he's churning his body to back into the C-cuts, okay? then he's already going to be behind the play. Okay, whether there's going to be a shot, well, now he's not square, so he has to try and square up while the shot's coming. Okay, if there's a pass across, okay, he might be churning the wrong way. Okay, so now his body's behind the play. So I find these drills are important. That way you're able to control your hip, you're able to stay square, and just kind of use the hip instead of your full body to make those movements. So,
Yeah, he can keep his chest square to the play and use his hip joint. He doesn't have to sort of use his whole body to kind of generate momentum is probably what we're trying to do when we use our whole body, eh?
That's a lot of times, and then it starts going into where you're moving your arms, and it causes a lot of problems. So I think it does start with your hip control, but the main thing is keeping control and staying square on the play and not kind of losing your whole body and falling behind the play before the puck even moves.
Yeah, and actually that sort of reminds me too, like another key thing of having that sort of rotator cuff strength in the hip is that it reduces the wear and tear on the hip. So now you're controlling that movement. It isn't sort of, your body, kind of trying to jerk your hip around. It's you're controlling it with the muscles that are meant to control it. So there is less sort of slopping around in the hip joint. That's beauty. Thanks, boys.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So we talked about the ability to sort of be smart in that hip, to be able to rotate and control that hip independent of what the rest of your body's doing. So really to have fine motor control at the hip joint. So this is really a variation of your clamshell exercise. So a lot of you have done this clamshell. But what we're going to do is we're going to abduct a little. So our feet aren't touching. So we have no other point of support. But we're still going to just rotate in, rotate out, as if my foot was sort of up on a bench or something was supporting it there. My torso shouldn't be moving at all. So I shouldn't be rolling back and rolling forward as I go. It's just pointing down, rotating up. And this one we want to go fairly slowly. We want to have good control. And we don't want this leg moving all over the place. We just want that nice rotation. And if you haven't tried them yet because you think they look too easy, they're a lot harder than they look. We also want to be able to rotate your body around your hip. So we're starting just in like an elbows and knees position. I'm going to extend this leg and put that toe down on the floor. Then I'm going to bring this hip around to tap, come back up. So I extend that. This toe goes on the floor. I bring that hip around to tap down. Now if I want to make it harder, what I do is keep this foot in the air. Don't let it tap down as we go. And that's going to be a lot harder. And you're going to see differences side to side. So one side, when I rotate to tap my right hip down, it feels pretty good. When I rotate to tap my left hip down, it just feels like, ooh, I'm not really sure how to do that. There's a little deficiency there. So pay attention to those side-to-side differences. It's not even necessarily a strength difference. It's just a matter of, hey, I'm not really sure exactly how to do that pattern. So after watching just those first two drills and hopefully giving them a try, that's the key ingredient. But hopefully you can feel how what you're doing right now for your hip strengthening really isn't cutting it for what you need when you're on the ice. Drop a comment below. Let me know what you feel when you do those drills, how it kind of feels like when you're on the ice. You're putting your energy in, but it feels like you have no strength there. And you probably feel similar feeling when you try these drills, but with practice, that's just your body trying to figure out, geez, what muscles am I using? This is a weird position for me to be using them. I'm not accustomed to it. So we just have to teach our body to do what we want it to do. Drop a comment below. Let me know what you feel. So a really nice way to work on those C-cut patterns away from the ice and finding how to create that tension with your foot in different positions is just doing hip circles with the glider, and we have a little resistance band there too. Now we can do this facing different directions. I'm just going to show you this way, but you would also turn around and do it facing the other direction, because as you switch your angle, it's going to change the emphasis on the muscles. But Jimmy will just show us how, and watch how he gets that foot angled in angled out as he comes around. His torso stays nice and stable. We would go equal reps forward, equal reps backwards. Good. And then we'd switch sides. So we work on the standing position, but remember on the ice we talked about how this is a very different hip position. So the way we use our muscles when we're in our half butterfly is really different than how we use our muscles when we're in a standing position. So Kenny's going to show us a variation of how we can do it. Again, watch his foot. Watch how his foot pivots around. Coming out here is so hard. It requires so much strength and control. That's it. So we go both directions. We go forward and we do an equal number of repetitions backwards. Good, you can stop but hold this position. You can also see how much load there is on that knee that's down, on the stabilizing leg, on his torso. He's not leaning away to make it happen. He's staying nice and tall and stable. So this really highlights nicely how, sometimes you'll hear a professional athlete who says, oh, I stopped lifting heavy weights, or I only use resistance bands now. What they're saying is they've started using lighter loads and they've started targeting more of their deep stabilizing muscles. And the deep stabilizing muscles are kind of a limiting factor to how much force your big, powerful muscles can produce. So it's not that those athletes don't still have really strong, powerful, big muscles, but they've taken the time to work on those deep stabilizers, and that's what's transformed their actual functional performance on the ice or the football field or whatever it is. So there are 4 new rotator cuff exercises for your hips, and again, don't go to your physio and start talking about the rotator cuff of the hip, because it actually kind of isn't a thing, it's the shoulder, but you know what I mean, and it highlights the importance of working those deep stabilizers so we can get maximum performance out of those big, powerful muscles that you maybe already have. If you got any value out of this video, hit me with a like. If you haven't subscribed already, subscribe. If you subscribed already, hit the bell. And I will see you next week. Same bad time, same bad channel.